Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kathleen Walters, and I'm a pediatric clinical dietitian, and I'm also on the celiac team at Children's National. Today, what we're going to do is go over some healthier gluten-free recipes that you might be interested in as the holiday season is quickly approaching. So I get this question a lot when I'm in clinic, just about some different recipe ideas, especially when a lot of the time when we have family and friends visiting, we want to have some of our favorite recipes, but also keep our overall health and well-being in mind for ourselves and for our families. So I'll just be going over a few ideas for some favorites over the holiday season. And really, it's here just going to be some small tweaks to some of your standard classic recipes that we're talking about. Okay, so the first one that we're going to go over is a sweet potato casserole. All right, so this is a sweet potato casserole recipe that I found from the website listed above, Joy Food Sunshine. All the recipes that I found really were just ones online. They weren't created by me, so you can use the reference that's listed, and I either use the recommended the recipe directly if I really like it, or I made small tweaks and adapted it to how I saw fit. So for this one, I really like this recipe. It includes just plain sweet potatoes that also includes the skin of the potatoes, so you get that really good fiber in there. Instead of using regular butter, I switch it out with Earth Balance butter. So you can use either, and Earth Balance has a lot of oil-based butters that are going to be more, that are going to be higher in unsaturated fats, so mono and polyunsaturated fats, so better for your health. They also have a vegan butter in case you follow a vegan diet or if you have any dairy allergies in your family. Instead of using regular milk, like a whole milk, I switch that out with a vanilla unsweetened almond milk. And that gives just like a nice subtle hint of vanilla with it. And it complements an actual vanilla flavoring, as you see listed below as well. To reduce some of the fat, I use unsweetened applesauce in it, and it gives it a nice kind of fall flavor as well. And instead of sugar, I use Truvia. So people have mixed feelings really about using alternative sweeteners. Out of the different kinds, I prefer Truvia or Stevia. So that is something, if you're interested in, you can use that. For the topping for it, because we all like a good crunchy topping on a sweet potato casserole, instead of using brown sugar and butter and pecans, I swap that out with just the chopped pecans and a gluten-free granola topping, like kind that's more, that has a variety of whole grains that are mixed into it, like millet, for instance. And they also have chia seeds in there, so just a really healthier granola option. So those are the ingredients, and these are the directions that you can follow. Next up is a whole grain gluten-free stuffing. For this one, I prefer a sweeter taste. So you'll see that in some of the ingredients, but you can certainly make a more savory option for gluten-free stuffing. For that, I would just recommend substituting maybe some of the dried fruit that you'll see listed in here with some different vegetables, and maybe using like a turkey or a chicken sausage instead. So this recipe I found actually on Stonewall Kitchen's website, and I've made it before for my family, and they absolutely love it. So again, it calls for Earth Balance, or I recommend using Earth Balance butter. It's a healthier butter alternative. Whole grain bread, so try using Shars. You could use Udi's. They have a couple of different whole grain options. Canyon Bakehouse is another good brand that I really enjoy. I increased the amount of vegetables in it. So the original recipe calls for less celery, less onion, but I bumped that up because the veggies really help to make it a filling recipe without taking away at all from the actual stuffing. And I like using a wide variety of different dried fruits in this. So you get different textures, different flavors from everything. And some nuts for some healthy unsaturated fats. For the chutney, Stonewall Kitchen has their own chutneys. The two that are listed on their website have all non-gluten containing ingredients. They are not considered gluten-free. They have some other sauces that are considered gluten-free, but these two are not. I spoke to the company over the phone about this, and they do have an allergen statement, which I'll list on one of the upcoming slides. Really just saying here that you're at your own risk. Because they use the same equipment to process foods that contain gluten, but they do have strict policies when it comes to cleaning the actual equipment and making sure that they're taking all the precautions that they can to ensure that there's no cross-contamination. So like any situation like that for a celiac patient, it is at your own risk, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to be contaminated if you use this chutney. But I have a second chutney recipe that is from scratch if you decide, no, I do not want to take this route and try one of their pre-made chutneys. So here's the recipe, as I mentioned, and the directions for the recipe. And then this is just the allergen statement coming directly from Stonewall Kitchen about their products. So you can take a minute just to read through that, get a feel for what their process is like, and if this is something that you would really consider. Again, for our team, really for anything where it says it's processed in a facility that also processes wheat, barley, or rye, really asking questions to the manufacturer about how it is, what precautions that they take is the most important thing you can do. For a just all natural chutney recipe, this is one that I do like. So this recipe includes gala apples. For these, I do like to keep the skin again for that fiber. You can use dark brown sugar, or you can replace that if you wanted to use a stevia or Truvia dark brown sugar, a little bit of orange juice there, so you get a little bit of a nice sweet tang, and some dried fruit from the cranberries. Excuse me, fresh or frozen for that. Okay, so the next one is an alternative to maybe a gluten-free croissant or a really flaky, buttery biscuit. I like to make oatmeal drop biscuits. And I actually make these throughout the year because I think they're so tasty. They're very nutrient dense, and just a staple that I like to have at dinner time. So for this, you can use a whole grain flour like buckwheat flour, or King Arthur has their whole grain gluten-free flour as well. I also mix that with almond meal. If you have an intolerance to oats, to gluten-free oats, then you can just do the buckwheat flour mixed with almond meal flour, but you'll see the old-fashioned oats are listed as the next ingredient there. I use the applesauce as a fat substitute, and it gives it just kind of a nice hearty fall flavor there. A little bit of half and half and milk, or sometimes I'll use almond milk for this recipe. And you can use eggs, or you can use flaxseed meal if you want to go for a dairy, if you have any egg allergies in your family, or if you just want to bump up the omega-3 fatty acids, bump up the fiber, then the flaxseed meal is a great way to go. Sometimes I'll even add in just a couple of extra tablespoons of flaxseed meal, and even hemp seeds too, just to make it that much more nutrient dense and higher in fiber and higher in protein and micronutrients. There's the directions. All right, macaroni and cheese, one of the favorites for all the kids that I see in clinic. So this recipe I actually found on the Cabbage Cheese website, and I really do think it's a great recipe that decreases a lot of the butter and some of the cheese. So you're decreasing that saturated fat, increasing the protein, getting some good calcium in there still with the milk and the yogurt, and still having a lot of flavor. So this one calls for whole grain quinoa elbows. I prefer using quinoa definitely over a white rice-based elbow pasta because it's more nutrient dense, higher in fiber, higher in protein, B vitamins, iron. And I like it more than the bean pastas for this recipe, just because it holds up better, in my opinion. I think I love bean pastas, whether it's chickpea, black bean, soybean, any of those pastas, I love them, but you really have to cook them to al dente, otherwise they turn to mush. The Greek yogurt and the Dijon give it a nice tang and some good flavor there, and it does have some light cheddar cheese in there. And instead of topping it with just a standard gluten-free breadcrumb that's not really going to have much in the way of nutrients, I like using chickpea breadcrumbs instead. And just to be clear, for when I say it has a lot of nutrients, the FDA doesn't require that every single micronutrient be listed on a nutrition facts panel. So you might look at the panel and say, well, these chickpea breadcrumbs aren't that much more healthier, that they're not more nutrient dense, but that's not actually the case. You're just not going to be able to see all those micronutrients listed. All right, and for a couple of desserts, we'll start off with an apple streusel. So this apple streusel calls for some gluten-free whole grains. So we have the millet flour mixed with old-fashioned oats. You can use maple syrup with this, or you could use that with another liquid sweetener or sweetener alternative as your choice. And for the filling, we use red apples with their skin on there and a mix of some nice spices. And you can see it really doesn't call for much butter, so we're really trying to decrease that saturated fat there. Here are the directions. If you wanted to make it extra crunchy, you could even take some of that gluten-free kind granola that I had mentioned earlier, just like as an extra crunch to go on top. And last but not least, we have a healthy pumpkin pie recipe. This is from Chocolate Covered Katie. I love a lot of her recipes, and a lot of them are naturally gluten-free, or you can just make small substitutes to make them gluten-free. But for this one, she uses, instead of the standard pumpkin pie filling that you can find in grocery stores, just straight pumpkin puree from a can. Full-fat coconut milk gives it a nice flavor, and you still get that kind of a milky, buttery flavor to it, just with that fat. Flax is great here for the omega-3 fatty acids and protein, and for the fiber, and rolled oats as well for that fiber, and to give it a nice texture. You can use either brown sugar, or you can use a stevia brown sugar. And I've used coconut sugar and brown sugar in this recipe, and I think both taste fantastic with it. Here's the directions. And this is just these are the directions for the crust. You can try almond flour. Katie does mention that on her website. I have not used almond flour for the crust, but it could definitely be worth a shot if you're trying just to make it even healthier. All right, so those are just a few recipe ideas to get you started. If none of these really appeal to you, you can always just do a quick Google search and type in one of your standard recipes that you want to make, and you can just say, for instance, healthy stuffing recipe, or you can just search for healthy stuffing, pull up the recipe, and think about just small substitutes you can make. So things that you can substitute out for the butter. So oil-based butter, or you can use an oil like flaxseed oil, walnut oil are two of my favorites. If you're making a savory stuffing, you can even try olive oil or maybe avocado oil. So those could be some fat substitutes there, or fat alternatives to just straight butter. For some of the recipes, particularly for the baked items, I also use the applesauce as a butter substitute. Milk substitutes, or if you wanted to just lower the fat content, you could use a lower fat milk, or you could use a plant-based milk. That's also an option. And for eggs, the eggs are just a great source of healthy fats and protein, among some other micronutrients as well. If there is an egg allergy in the family, or if you just prefer not to use eggs in some of your cooking, then you can try the flaxseed meal. So that would be 1 tablespoon flaxseed and 3 tablespoons water. So those are just, again, a few ideas to get you started. Hope this helps. And if you have questions, please feel free to reach out to our celiac team, and we'll see you in the next webinar.